Hello and welcome to the Vlogging Pod. Today we are joined by a fabulous author of two series, Crossroads of Kings, Mill, and Guardians of Darcia. Welcome,
Hello,
Loni.
how are you? Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. All right. Okay, I'm gonna try to mute you again, just because we're getting a little bit of feedback. My first question for you tonight is I'm gonna start this interview off by asking you about a story written at the age of 13, one in which you won a contest. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Um, the contest was for a JC's contest for the school that they were doing for Halloween stories. And I thought, sure, why not? My English teacher, said there was going to be a $50 gift certificate and all this. So I thought, I'm going to write one. And I had been reading, I know at 13, reading Stephen King was not something that most kids did at that age, but I was reading some Stephen King and I thought, I'm going to try some just crazy off the wall Halloween stuff. So I wrote this short story that was kind of out there. It wasn't like a happy ending kind of thing, it was kind of spooky and macabre. I guess it was more Edgar Allan Poe-ish because it didn't have a whole lot of gore to it. It just had a lot of interesting things in it. And I didn't think anything about it. And a few weeks later, my teacher came up to me and she said, Lonnie, you won the contest out of all the schools in the area. You won the contest and you've got 2 tickets to the haunted house and $50 gift certificate. And so I was like, really? I won for a writing contest? So that was my first love of writing. And from that point on, it just kind of blossomed into various other things. But I've always loved, kind of spooky things, but not so much the gruesome things, but more of the paranormal, kind of, I don't know, kind of mystery kind of things. So, Edgar Allan Poe and some Sherlock Holmes tucked in there a little bit. So, those kind of things.
Well, I love Sherlock Holmes. And since we're talking about your youthful experiences, tell me about your time in, let's see, what was it? You about diving into the World Encyclopedia. I heard somewhere that this was your favorite book.
Yes, it was. I used to wake up early in the morning on weekends. I was always an early riser when everybody else was sleeping in. And my mother had a set of World Book encyclopedias from the 60s and 70s, and they had all the 1970s. And yeah, I'm dating myself here. But I would sit and go from A all the way to Z, and then do the world yearbooks that came in the set every year. But it was so much fun and interesting things because I was growing up in these small towns around the country, and this took me into places and different countries and introduced me to people in history and time that I wouldn't know about any other way. Back in the day, we didn't have the internet and Google and all that fun stuff. So that was my way of researching and finding fascinating characters and places to think about. And one day, dream about going to. And I have been to some of those places now, so it's been a little fun to see those places that I've read about in encyclopedias.
Well, that's awesome, actually. You can learn a lot of knowledge from the encyclopedias. Well, we had those when I was growing up too, and I was born in the '70s, so there you go. So that dates me too. So tell me about Wanted One Ghost. I believe, now, if I'm correct here, I believe this was the first book you've written.
This was the first book that I wrote. My husband actually, when I started writing it, he said, okay, I'm going to give you 1 year to finish an entire manuscript. He said, I'm tired of seeing all these little notepads around the house with snippets of stories here and there. He said, here you go. Here's a computer, here's a laptop, He gave me everything, including a hard drive and a printer, and said, "You have 1 year. I want to see a full book, and then try and get it out there." And I'm like, "Okay, okay, no problem." So I sat down and I wrote the first draft to Wanted One Ghost, and it went through a couple of course, couple of drafts because it was never quite good enough, and I had gone through. I had been introduced to the Maryland romance writers, and had gotten into some critique groups that helped me with the bare bones of everything. So that was a great thing to have done at that time. And I still use a lot of those techniques and things that they've taught me over the years. But the Wanted One Ghost was so much fun to write because the characters just took to themselves and created the story. And I've added so many characters from that each book that I've written in this series, and even some of the smaller um, stories off of that I've written, they've all played a cameo. They've come back and kind of played a cameo role in various parts and pieces. So they've become close friends of mine, the characters. But Wanted One Ghost was a lot of fun because I got to use a lot of the history of the area that I live in now, which takes place in a lot of the American Revolution, or right before the American Revolution, but it also takes place in a lot of the had to deal with a lot of the area um, that I live in Western Maryland, and it's just got a lot of history. Of course, the Civil War was one of the books, part of the Crossroads of Kings Mill, in my series. One of my books called Unsettled Graves also takes place and uses the Civil War as part of that theme. So a lot of different themes there, a lot of different history to go on. So I take and run with that a lot with my books.
That's really cool. In full disclosure, Lonnie and I have actually met. We met in Maryland on a book tour, Hollow Read, so we've actually met in person, which is awesome. And since we're talking about your books, Lonnie, tell us a little bit about Immortal Moonlight, which I believe is your newest.
I haven't gotten it out yet. It's in the third draft right now, but I do have the cover for it, and I have been promoting it a little bit here and there. It's the fourth book in the Guardians of Dacia series, and it's I think it's about women empowering themselves. So I'm really excited about this because it's not just a romance; it's about a woman's journey. So it's a whole different twist on how I want to examine some of my characters and some of the roles that they play within this series that I have in this world that I created. And even though it's a fictional world of immortals and fantasy, I think it has a lot to do with women in general. Some of the things that they face on a regular basis, and things that they faced over um, centuries. But I think in general, it's about a woman finding herself and where she belongs in life, and I think that's so important in any day. I think, and using this character is a lot of fun because she gets to be a little out there sometimes. So I'm really excited about hopefully getting the final draft done and out. I meant to have it out earlier this year, and then life happened. That's all I can say is life just happened.
I fully understand that. We all kind of get carried away in our own lives. But since we're talking about the series, can you tell us a little bit more about how it actually came about? I mean, your first brainstorm ideas of the series?
Guardians of Dacia.
Yes, please.
Guardians of Dacia. I was actually researching my family history on my father's side, and my great grandfather came from Romania. And I started doing some history, and of course, everybody knows about Dracula and all the paranormal things that came from Transylvania and that area of Romania. But they don't know about a lot of the other history behind that too, that goes even further than, of course, Vlad the Impaler, who was one of the inspirations for Dracula. And but the I went a little further into the pre-Romanian conquest before the Romans conquered Romania, and delved back into the history and some of the folklore and legends of that time frame. And they did use a lot of the same inspiration. Like the wolf is very is almost a talisman for a lot of their clans in Romania. Um, and when they were known as Dacia, that's where the Guardians of Dacia came from. The idea behind it was that the the clan that I had created, they caused a civil war amongst themselves, which began the fall of Dacia when the Roman conquest took place. And because they had been such a powerful nation prior to that, and so my characters kind of created that downfall. And when they did that, the Dacian gods cursed them and created, kind of separated them. And this is their storyline, and it's now present tense, and they're recreating and restructuring their clan. After thousands of years, their bloodline has been restored, and now more characters and more immortals are coming into play, and it's creating havoc in their old world and their old line that is now okay. Now we've got to think about a whole new generation and a whole new culture to come into play here. So it's it all started on researching my family history, and it went further than I expected into folklore and legend, which I thought was really fascinating. And I thought, I'm going to go with this.
Well, that's cool. I'm going to try to talk and not mute you because, oh, wait a minute, I'm still hearing myself. Okay, I got to mute. So, when I do my research on you, I like to dive a little deep into each of my guests. So I hear you write 4 to 5 hours a day, which first off, I have to say, wow. With a full schedule of your working and home life, how do you make the time for 4 to 5 hours a day?
I'm going to have to admit that that's probably not as much as I don't do that as much as I used to. I try and do at least 2 hours a day. Sometimes I might only get 1 hour a day lately, but I do work a full time job outside of writing. But I have created a slot in which and as you know, you have to also do, marketing and writing and find time to do all the different steps along the way. So that's one of the issues as being an independent author. A lot of times is you're wearing so many hats and having to take on those things. And what I want to try and just do is just be able to sit and write, and that's what I'm hoping for. And I try and get at least 8 hours a week now. 4 and 5 hours a week. That was probably a few months ago, but I haven't been able to do that lately. As we go back, life happened.
Oh, I fully understand that. But as we talk about your writing and taking off to new heights, let's switch gears just a minute and talk about your climb up Diamond Head in Hawaii.
Oh yes, not only once, but I've done it 5 times. Every time we had guests that came over, because we lived in Hawaii for 4 years when we were stationed there. My husband and I were in the military, and when we were stationed there, we would have guests, any guests that we had that came to visit, we would take them to Diamond Head, and of course we climbed Diamond Head. So we did it then. And then when we took our children back, my oldest daughter was born there, but she was only about a little less than a year old when we moved back to the mainland. And so we promised her when she graduated high school, or before she graduated high school, that we would take her and her sister back to Hawaii, and we did. So again, we climbed Diamond Head with them because you have to when you go to Hawaii, you have to climb Diamond Head. That's just all there is to it. There's a few things you have to do, and you have to climb Diamond Head.
Well, that's awesome. Well, we only have a few minutes left, but I want you to think 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 very closely to this. Tell our listeners one thing that if we were to scan the internet for you, tell us one thing as an author that we may not know or may be able not to be able to find about you as an author.
As an author, wow, you may not be able to find. Wow, that I was a radio DJ. I don't know. um, as an author, you may not be able to find all of my writing experiences behind the what you see out there. I would like to be able to share all those experiences. One of the things that I feel very strongly about is trying to share, especially with like a younger audience, um, because when I started writing, for me, it was more than just the contest that I won. It became my outlet. A lot of people, they say they used to write poetry or they used to draw or they used to dance, or but for me it was writing, putting myself in character situations and writing about things helped me deal with things growing up that came to me in either, the teenage angst that we go through, or certain situations that happen. And I would love to be able to share that with a younger generation and go, here's something to help you cope with whatever it is you're going through. Sit down and write about it. Sit down and write it out. Sit down and see it in paper. And if it becomes a story, that's great. But write it out so you can see what's actually going on instead of just feeling sad or angry or whatever. Write it out and let your feelings, so you can see what you're feeling on paper. And I think that's so important in this day and age, to let kids know that they have an outlet like that.
Well, that is awesome. I want to thank you so much for being on the program. I want to thank our audience for being here. We do have a guest lined up for next Thursday, so please stay tuned and check in with us. I want to thank you all again for a great evening. Have a good evening as well. I know that sounds a little tongue tied there, but thank you so much for joining us again. Loni, my pleasure. You were such an awesome guest. Thank you again, everybody. Have a great evening. Bye bye for now.